certainly for us the experience was quite horrendous, and I think for a lot of people in Christchurch, because we were so fortunate at the time to have no deaths and the city was still pretty much intact because it was its first lot of movement, the experience for a lot of people was just as bad that time as it was with this other earthquake. I was sitting down at my desk down some wooden stairs, and when that quake shook, my 11-year-old, who was home from school that day, immediately went to run to me. And even though children have had so many drills of what to do, and they know to get under the desks and all those sorts of things, when a mother is present, children will just do what's instinctual. And so she went to run downstairs to me, and a child gate, which would have been a metre high, flung shut in front of her, and she fell down the stairs and landed at the bottom of wooden stairs on her neck. So that for me was my image. Oh, my daughter's broken her neck. My 4-year-old was standing in the kitchen, and just the sound is horrendous, just shattering glass. And by the end of the shaking, there was not one square inch that didn't have broken glass or crockery on it. So the trauma for that was pretty horrendous. We went and sat in the back of the house for an hour. 2 neighbours came over to collect us, and we were standing outside. Now, our view from the top of the hill looked right over Redcliffs, out over towards Brighton Pier and over the city, so we could see smoke and all sorts of things happening in the city. Sirens, car alarms, house alarms, everything that could make a noise made a noise. And then there was a 5.9 aftershock that hit, and we were standing outside, and we had quite a bit of cliff in behind us, and we weren't feeling that safe. We turned around to look at the view, and the bank and Redcliffs just dropped down into the backs of houses, and we all stood there and we looked at each other in shock, and we just knew, and we said, people are dead. So the next couple of days was incredibly surreal. It took my husband 3.5 hours to get home that day. My father, who was in town staying with us, which I was so blessed that he was there to know what our family had lived through, was usually a 10-15 minute drive away. Took him 5.5 hours to get home to us, and he was driving around the corner, and he realised it was bad when he saw a woman up to her neck in liquefaction. So some of the images were very graphic. So yeah, very, very surreal.
It's certainly surreal, I think, sitting here listening to it. It's quite heartrending as well to think about some of the things that have happened to families and lives down there also. We've got the trauma recovery team down there at the moment working with children that are experiencing anxiety and adults that are experiencing depression. And I was just chatting with a friend of mine the other day who's been transferred from Wellington to the Christchurch branch. And she was saying that what's kind of come out of the earthquake that we don't see a lot of on the news is that you could be walking down the street and there might be like 5-6 people that you don't even know that just come up and give you a hug.
That's a really important thing to realise is when I got on the plane, when I looked at my daughter's eyes after that second quake, I just knew as a mother I had to get them out of the city just so that they could mentally recover. And so we flew out 3 days later, and I was completely out of my mind and out of my body, and I think this is what people in Christchurch are still going through. We've disconnected from our bodies, and we're just in survival mode at the moment. And I remember sitting at the traffic lights in the pouring rain in Hamilton, trying to find a WINZ office so that I could go and get some food for my family, because we'd left home, we'd lost everything for the second time, and I was sitting there going, and I couldn't find this jolly place. I was trying to find civil defence and things like that. And if my 4-year-old wasn't in the car with me, I know what I would have done. I was able to observe what was happening in my mind, and I sat at some red traffic lights, and I just wanted to get out of the car and sit on the ground and cry. And if Amelie wasn't in the car with me, I probably would have done that. But as soon as I got my cell phone back, because that had smashed in the earthquake, and felt connected again. So I was torn between wanting to stay with everybody that I loved and my friends in Christchurch, but having to get my children out. So it was a very bizarre feeling coming up here, because my worry was they're not going to know what I've been through. They're not going to know what my children have been through. They're not going to understand. So there was a big pull for us to stay in Canterbury, and I'm sure that's why a lot of people have chosen to stay there. The blessing that's come out of this, though, is that, in 22 seconds, everything you love, everything that you've prized and worked hard for, falls off the walls and smashes. And there were beautiful multi-million-dollar homes that we overlooked with the glass panes just thrown out onto the ground. So your ego sheds in that moment, and the ego tells us, I am what I do, I am my career, I am my role, my position. Well, a lot of people have lost their jobs through this, and that's gone. I am my possessions, I am what I've accumulated. I mean, most of us lost, a good portion of those things. And I am what others think of me. So therefore, how I handle that moment, But the reality is that in 22 seconds, that has to go. And what you're left with is the soul in shock and dazed. And so you do have to reach out to each other and that community. And I really believe, like a lot of people in Canterbury, that we needed that as a community in order to bring us right back together again. And so for now going forward, we have to keep looking towards those blessings and opportunities. And I do firmly believe that while it's going to take some time for the city to heal and recover and repair and rebuild, going forward, Canterbury will be one of the best places to live in the future in terms of community.
Certainly, we're seeing that it certainly has brought community together. And the planet is certainly presenting us with opportunities to be able to shift out of that mind consciousness, like what you're talking about, more into that heart consciousness, out of the dualistic, more into a unity.
It's the disconnection, and I think why some friends and I sensed that first quake coming last year was that everyone was so disconnected and so rooted in ego and so having to have bigger, faster, better, more, that they had lost that sense. But we are all combined. We are all one consciousness. And so for people that are very sensitive, we're tuning into that and sensing what was going on.
And I think it's going to be important moving forward to actually lead out from the heart. We hear a lot of, in the spiritual kind of community at the moment, we hear a lot about, get out of the mind and the mind's bad, but it's not actually about that. It's about actually shifting from a mind consciousness into a heart consciousness, leading out from there first. And when you actually do that, when you then come from a heart space, come from that place of compassion, you actually shift out of the emotional, part of your brain, out of the reactive part of your brain, and more into the cortex. And it's from here that we have the ability to be able to observe thought without the emotional attachment that goes with it. And that's, in moving forward, that's, you've been down there. Would you say that that's a key kind of part in the way in which
I think the key in terms of recovery is certainly there's 3 steps. And the first one is forgiveness. So we need to forgive ourselves for how we may have reacted. I know a grandmother that was sitting just around the corner from her grandson's school, yet she froze for 3 hours and couldn't move. And so forgiveness of ourselves for how we react during shock. And forgiveness of others, so forgiving the grandmother that may have sat there and not gone to get the grandchild, and also forgiveness of Mother Nature. A lot of people are angry with Mother Nature right now, and we've really got to shift that. So forgiveness is the first step. Then we need to move into flow. We need to stay in flow with this. This has happened for a reason. We have to have a spiritual reference for what's happened and is happening to us in our city. And we need to trust that process. We need to have acceptance for what is, and then bring in the allowing. But certainly, to me, I had to let go. I had to let go of the life that I had. I'm grieving for the life that I had, and my children are grieving for their friends and their schools that they loved. So we have to let go of all of that and then turn it into the positive.
There's grief for people that have been lost. There's grief for the actual lifestyle that has been lost. And I think it's important that people actually have a period of time to experience that grief. We learn as we're growing up not to actually show our emotion. Big boys don't cry, and to try and suppress our emotion. But it's important to allow that emotion to be there, because it's simply just a feedback mechanism for our body. Certainly grieve, welcome it, and when the emotion is there, notice where it is. Begin to connect in with it in your body. Sometimes people feel it up in their chest, sometimes down in their stomach. Usually there's some kind of movement to it. Take time out to just stop and close your eyes and focus your attention on the emotion, and notice that it may spin up in terms of movement, it may slow down. But if you keep your focus and your attention purely on the emotion for about 10-15 minutes, eventually over time you will find that it will lessen and that it will release. And if it comes back, that's okay. It's important that we feel this and to acknowledge it and to allow it to be there and to say, wow, there's that feeling again, and that's okay. And even though I'm feeling this way, I know that I'm going to move through this.
and say, what are the blessings? What have we got to be grateful for? Because I really believe that coming from a place of gratitude for what's left and is the key going forward. And the third step for me is really being able to stay in the observer mind. So what saved me from breaking down that day was observing what my mind was doing, not playing out what the mind was wanting me to do, or rather the ego was wanting me to do, because the ego had lost so much. And it was wanting that back. So staying in flow and trusting and just completely letting go. But certainly what Teresa's saying is correct. If we can observe our mind rather than attach to the emotions that arise that want to overtake us, then we'll be able to stay in flow and we'll be able to look forward to a positive future.